Today on Locked On Canadiens, it's part 2 of our conversation with the incomparable Tony Ferrari, in which we ask him point blank which Canadiens player has the highest upside.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1117 of Locked On Canadiens. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. As you know, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is Laura Saab, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Scott Matla, as well as Tony Ferrari of The Hockey News. And Tony has written an article about the depth of the Montreal Canadiens prospect pool. We get into it with Tony in this episode, in which we ask him so many questions. Do you want to know more about Aatos Koivu? Did you want to know more about basically where the Habs prospect pool is going, what we can expect? There's so much meat to this episode. I can't wait for you to listen to it. You know we love Tony. He brings so much insight. And if you missed part 1 yesterday, the vibes were impeccable. We are so hyped about the Montreal Canadiens prospect. We're so happy about the future. And Tony really, really brought it. And without further ado, here's our conversation. Is there anything that you see in this prospect pool that is specifically missing? Because I get asked that all the time, and mine is always a number one defenseman, which is not to say that there aren't people in this pool that could pan out to be a number one defenseman, but I'm talking like a perennial Norris contender guy. I just don't see it yet.
Yeah, I think number one defenseman is probably the thing. I like David Reinbacher. The Habs drafted him probably higher than I would have, but I like the game that he plays. I like everything that he can bring to the ice. Can he be a guy that helps Lane Hutson, get there and get to be that high-end offensive guy? Sure. But Lane Hutson is probably a better number two. And you can play them together as a pairing and have both of them being number two guys, and that's your top pairing. And you're probably doing better than most teams in the NHL with that. But having that true number one kind of do-it-all Norris contender that is out there when you need to defend a lead, out there when you need a goal, finishes the season with 70 points, and has the ability to kind of shut things down when he needs to, I think that's missing. And the other area, and as much as I went in on how much I love all the forwards, the left wing leaves a little to be desired. And that's being nitpicky because maybe a Michael Hage ends up on the left wing, or maybe an Owen Beck ends up on the left wing, or one of the forwards or one of the centers end up moving to the wing. So maybe that's kind of picking at a weakness that isn't there. But left wing with Emil Heineman, Florian Xhekaj, Sean Farrell, and even Xavier Simoneau, who I absolutely love, maybe that's not the greatest depth. But with the depth you have everywhere else, it's mostly just making fun of something that isn't really there.
So I'm going to ask you point blank, do you think Demidov is the player on this team that has the most upside?
I think within 3 years, Demidov is probably the highest scoring Hab. I think he has the most upside. I think he has the most upside offensively of any player in the entire 2024 draft class, Macklin Celebrini included.
Wow.
I think his creativity and skill and just ability to process the game at a higher level and a higher pace than just about anybody is going to make him one of the most dangerous players in the league. I think it won't be shocking to see him challenge 100 points, if not reach it a couple of times. I look at the way Kirill Kaprizov affects the game. I look at the way Mitch Marner affects the game, not in the playoffs. And I go, that's the kind of player you could see with an Ivan Demidov. And I think the defensive efforts there, like you see him putting an effort on that end of the ice. And he's not as small as everyone made him out to be early in the year. Watching him on the ice, I felt that way. The measurements down in Florida felt that way. Everyone talked about how much he'd grown and how he learned English, which is one of the funniest storylines of the entire draft class. And then seeing him in person, he's a stocky kid. He's well built. He's 6 foot. Like, I'm 5'11", as generously as I want to list myself.
Is that
And
your
he was
height, like
definitely-
on NHL.com or like in real life?
In real life, it's 5'10" and 3/4, but we're not going to go into that. We're going to round up because that's what we do here. And Demidov is at least 6'3" compared to me. No, Demidov is at least 6 foot. And I think he's going to maybe even grow another range. Like, he's 18. So there's room for him to grow, fill out. And man, I think this kid can be a menace. And I think 5, 6, 7 years from now, 10 years from now, we're looking back at this draft class and going, yeah, that Russian factor really helped the Habs here.
My follow-up question to that is, because the number one thing we've gotten is when he comes over at the end of his contract this year, do you play him with Nick Suzuki on that top line with Caulfield, or do you move him to the second line with Kirby Dach? And who's moving to the second line? Do you move Caulfield? Do you move Slavkovsky? Who do you move around, given his style of play, which I just describe as awesome, because I can't remember the last time the Canadiens had a prospect like this in their pool. And I don't think there's a bad spot that they can put him on this team unless it is opposite of Josh Anderson. And even I'm considering the fact that he might make Josh Anderson look good at this point. Or am I asking too much with that?
No, I think it's a situation where, in my mind, I've always went, man, I really don't care who you put at center, which is a weird thing to say because centers are so important in the NHL. But him on one wing and Slavkovsky on the other wing, the way their games would complement each other is just so fun to watch. It would be so fun to see on the ice in the NHL. Slavkovsky would be able to go in the corners, crash and bang, rip the puck off the wall, throw 2 guys if he needs to, because that's what he realized halfway through the season last year is he's just bigger. And he started using that fact. Him doing that while Demidov's buzzing around, making passes through his legs and doing so many fun things. You could put Josh Anderson at center, but the fact is Josh Anderson's not going to hit the net when he shoots the puck. And whoever plays with those two is going to get a lot of chances to shoot the puck. So I almost look at a guy like Owen Beck down the line because he has a really good shot. He's able to kind of leverage his shooting ability and leverage the strength that he has in his frame to get the puck off his stick, where maybe Owen Beck isn't a true number 2 center. Maybe he's not a guy that is the line driving presence on that line. But with those two, I think you have kind of a perfect mix of 3 guys who are all not going to fail you defensively, 3 guys who are all going to put in an effort offensively. Demidov is going to blow minds in transition. And both of those two are going to set up a guy like Owen Beck, who is so smart, and he'll just get to those pockets of space. And with his finishing ability, which I think is kind of underrated, I wouldn't be shocked to see Owen Beck be a 30-goal scorer because of those guys. So I think while Owen Beck I don't look at and project as a 30-goal scorer on his own, with those two, you could kind of see it. And the way he would mesh with them makes a lot of sense. So I think that's kind of the way I look at it. Who plays that Owen Beck role at the end of this season, though, is what your question was. Kirby Dach could do it. I think he would be a perfectly good option there. But then who do you put up on that top line? Because when Slavkovsky's not been there, Kirby Dach has been a really good option there. Maybe you just put Alex Newhook up there, or maybe you put Alex Newhook in the center spot. I know you don't love that. Habs fans haven't necessarily loved it. But
I'm on the record. I haven't loved it.
Believe me, I love Alex Newhook. I don't love him as a center. But you don't have to rush it. And I think the reality is whoever is playing center with Demidov at the end of this season probably isn't going to be his long-term center. And I think that's the thing every Habs fan can take solace in.
I think I call it Chris Kunitzing, right? Like you get to play with Sidney Crosby, you put up all kinds of points. This is like kind of the reverse. You're the center in that scenario. We will have more with Tony in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. And if you're like me, summer is kind of a hard time because there's so few sports going on. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. The sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. You heard me? Daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official betting partner of Major League Baseball. I do want to ask, because you talked a little bit about how Demidov is still growing. One of the things that I found most heartwarming was the, obviously, Aatos Koivu pick. That was definitely something that, we were talking about. We wanted it, the nostalgia, the nepotism, all of that. But if you step back and look at it objectively as a Habs pick, a lot of people said that it was a reach, but then there were a lot of people in the know that were talking about how, he hasn't really scratched the surface because this kid is kind of still growing into his body and into his game. So what are your thoughts on that? I just wanted you to weigh in a little bit, make me feel better maybe.
I really like Aatos Koivu. It was a guy that I originally watched because someone was like, "Oh, Saku Koivu's kid's eligible this year," and I'm like, "Oh, let's go see how bad this kid is. Like, he's gonna get drafted because of Saku's kid, and yada yada yada." Like, the Habs to take him in the 7th round. Just kidding. It's the 3rd round. But when I watched him, I'm like, "Oh, that was actually a pretty good game." And I have a big long notebook that I keep on my computer all season, and I made a bunch of notes. And I was like, "Oh, that was a pretty good game. I didn't hate that." So I was like, well, now I got to watch at least one more. So I watched another game of his. I'm like, he did a lot of the right things. He processes the game well. He plays like a pro. He has pro habits. He gets to the boards. He's always on the right side of the puck. One of the things I always look for is when a guy's defending and he has a stick in one hand and he's poking it out to one side, is he at least putting the stick on the side you want him to put it on so that he's angling the guy to the outside and putting the guy into the corner or something? And Koivu was always doing stuff like that. And as I watched him throughout the season, I'm like, okay, he's got a pretty decent wrist shot. He's got a good, some legit scoring ability. Maybe there's a little bit more here. Obviously, he's the captain's son. But man, there's some game here. I think he's a good, smart two-way player. Like I said, maybe he isn't the number 2 center. And I don't think anyone's expecting that out of a 3rd-round pick, realistically. But you draft guys like Owen Beck, you draft guys like Oliver Kapanen, who I look at and I go, man, that's kind of just finished Owen Beck, B-plus version. Aatos Koivu is kind of just a B-plus version of that. They do a lot of the same things. He's got a lot of the same traits. So it's Koivu down the middle on the 4th line, or whether it's Kapanen on the 4th line, or Beck on the 3rd line, or whoever it may be, I think it's just another good option to have of a guy that plays a smart, projectable game. Maybe he really is just an AHL top line center, a guy that you can call up and play a few games here and there. But that kind of career can get you 250, 300 games in the NHL. And teams teams look at that and they go, that's a success, especially in the 3rd round. So I think it was a good pick. I like Aatos Koivu. He was on my ranking at the end of the year. A lot of people questioned it, but I think he's a player that certainly has the ability to play serviceable professional minutes. He did it at the Liga this year, looked really good in that league. So I think it was a solid pick.
And the thing about it is, it's Kent Hughes nailed the first 2 picks, like we've talked about, and we haven't talked a ton about Michael Hage at this point, but you come out of day number 1 where Celine Dion, introduces your highly sought after 5th overall pick here, one of the best picks you've made in recent memory. You draft Michael Hage, who has this incredible story of growing up a Habs fan, and everything that goes along with that. And then there's no picks in round 2. And then you go out and you draft the son of one of the most beloved players in modern history. That alone, it's it was almost impossible to ignore. Someone probably would have taken him shortly thereafter, like you said, based on his last name there. And the Canadiens went out and did that. Yeah, they maybe did it with Florian Xhekaj too, but that seems to be coming up at least halfway decently already. Just doing that for the non-on ice reasons alone is such an incredible thing that also Kent Hughes basically, they would have built him a statue. If all these players hit and like Koivu becomes a regular in the NHL, which I don't know if that'll be there, they're going to build Kent Hughes a statue outside the Bell Center at that rate. Like, bringing the Koivu family back to Montreal is such an incredible bit for him. Honestly, that like, it's a good way to endear yourself to a fan base where a lot of people are like, okay, chop on the rebuild. I want playoff hockey again. It's quite a way to buy some grace out of everything out there.
Scott, do you have anything before we move on to listener questions? Because we've got a few.
My biggest thing is I wanted to ask for your thoughts on Michael Hage, just because he's someone I really liked in my when we did our mock draft. He was Laura and I's pick in that spot because we didn't think, hey, why not? This is a high skill player in that position. Didn't realize there was so much more detail behind that.
I also picked him because he's Lebanese.
Well, yes. Well, it was him or Andrew Basha, and we negotiated between the two of them and ended up with Hage. So I just want to know why. Give our listeners some more Scouts insight on why they should be excited about Michael Hage this upcoming year, and any information where he's playing next year, all that good stuff.
Well, I think the story with Michael Hage has always been out there all season. His father passed away tragically last summer at a summer barbecue in a pool accident. And needless to say, the kid was affected. Every kid that would lose their dad in that fashion, especially when they've been so integral, and your love for hockey would be affected by that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Michael Hage was a Habs fan because his dad was a Habs fan. They grew up watching the Habs score big goals, go on long playoff runs. He talked about being upset with Chris Kreider because of what he did to Carey Price. He made a 3-1 joke about the Leafs at the end of his news availability or media availability at the draft. Like, this kid loves the Habs. And the fact that he was drafted to them, obviously a fantastic story. With that said, I absolutely love this kid. He's a guy that plays with pace, plays with energy. He's a true dual threat player, a guy that can finish, a guy that can set up plays. He's a bit of a water bug. He's got some really good hands. He opens up space for himself. I think his ability to kind of use his puck handling in a way that's functional to just create room so that he can find a passing lane to hit his teammate in stride or do these little things. I love his game. I think he's going to need to take some of the one-on-one game out of his kind of habits. He does like to go and take a defender one-on-one a little bit too much for my liking, but he's going to the University of Michigan knowing that he's going to get a great path for development there. He's going to have ample opportunity to kind of learn from the guys that have come before him. That's a great program. I think he's going to be able to round the little things in his game that maybe are a little bit of a flaw out. And at the end of the day, like, I think he's got second line center upside. I think he's a guy that can be the 2C behind Nick Suzuki, especially when you have a strong 3C like Owen Beck, and you're able to kind of insulate a guy like Michael Hage with Slafkovsky and Demidov on his wings. Or if Beck is the guy that they put on that 2C spot, Hage is going to be a fantastic number 3C, or maybe Hage is that missing winger who we put up on the top line. Or so if Slav plays up on that top line, maybe you just go all out electricity on that second line and put Hage on the wing there. There's a lot of options. He plays with a lot of versatility, and he's a guy that I think Habs fans are going to absolutely love him when they see him on the ice. It's fun to watch a guy that grew up for a team, had the story that he has, and still has all of the skill and offensive punch to back it up.
He was electric at development camp. Like, obviously a lot of their top prospects were missing due to various reasons, or the Habs just like saying take some time off because he played enough games. Watching Hage in those 4-on-4 games, and yes, I know it's 4-on-4 and there's extra ice, just a cut above so many players that watching him just weave and make things happen on his edges and everything, it's like, it's exciting. It's such an exciting time that it's like, yeah, Demidov is awesome, But also, here's this other really nice shiny Porsche in your garage too that you can look at over here. Like, I know we talked about the depth of the pool and everything else. It's been such a long time that I feel like everyone is not hinging all their hopes on one piece. I know there is a disproportionate amount on Ivan Demidov because it's the 5th overall pick and everything this team's been looking for. But oh my God, sleeping on some of these other prospects like a Michael Hage in this system, despite being a first-round pick, I'm giddy thinking about getting to watch them play games this year and take that next step.
All right.
It's going to be so fun. It's a good prospect pool. You guys should be very happy with this draft.
We're quite excited about the future, and some of our listeners are as well. So we're going to go through some mailbag questions. I know, Tony, you've been with us for quite some time now. I'm so sorry.
Gotta sneak a drink in there.
We're just really quickly, or as quick as we possibly can, go through some of the questions. More with Tony in just a moment. So our good friend Jack-Eye Face Punch, I love that name, had some other mailbag questions, which we'll get to in a non-prospect mailbag. But one of the questions that he had for us was, what do you think Florian's timeline is for reaching the NHL?
It's a long one. I think it's 4 years maybe, and that seems long, but I think he's going to be a guy that needs that seasoning at the AHL level. We saw Arbor go back down to the AHL last year, and I know he tore it up there, and he looked great there, and he probably should have been in the NHL a little bit sooner, but he was kind of a victim of the logjam on the blue line back there. And I think Florian's going to be kind of in the similar boat. Like, he's going to be a guy that comes in at 23 or 24, and that's when he's able to kind of make that NHL impact. But it may not be ideal. Like, you may want all your prospects there sooner, but you're going to need the 23-year-olds to come up and play on cheap deals when some of your other guys are making more money, and that's just the reality of it. So I think a guy like Florian Jack-Eye taking 3 or 4 more years isn't the worst thing in the world.
Because it's going to be really fun when he is there. So our lovely friend Jay Foster, again, check out Locked On Blue Jackets for an interview with Caden Lindstrom, which is awesome. What's your prediction for Michael Hage's floor and ceiling? Okay, we did that. Let's move on to the next one. Which Habs prospect doesn't get as much love as they should?
My boy, Philip Machar. I think he got a lot of love right after he was drafted. Everyone wanted to see him in Laval, but then he got sent to Kitchener. And then last year, everyone wanted to see him in Laval, and he went back to Kitchener. And I think this year, we're finally going to get to see him in Laval. We're going to get to see some of the pro habits that he developed as a draft eligible and as a younger player in the Slovak League, where he was kind of a menace along the boards. He was a guy that was a dog on a bone. And sometimes I look at European players, that, especially ones that play pro over there, and they come over to the CHL and they're trying to play a pro game, and they look around and they go, why wasn't that guy where he's supposed to be? And it's because the CHL in general is chaotic. So I think sometimes you look at his point totals and you're like, well, he didn't score the lights out. Well, you know what? He couldn't, because even though Kitchener was a really good team, that's a team that plays chaotic hockey, as every junior team does. So I think this year we're going to see a big step and kind of we're going to get to fully realize what Philip Machar can be at the next level.
Just for context on that about Philip Machar's points, for everyone who's asked about him not producing, 103 points in 97 games, 20 points in 19 playoff games over 2 seasons, where he's been injured and on a team that didn't sometimes utilize him to his full potential there. I love Philip Machar, probably one of the most exciting pieces added to the Rocket roster this upcoming year, and they're going to need that without a Jesse Olin in there, with the losing Leah Sanderson to the NLA. This is going to be a guy who's going to get those opportunities under Pascal Vincent to potentially thrive and hit that next level. And like you said, use those pro habits to really make that jump a little bit more easy on himself, I think.
Speaking of hitting the next level, what does Joshua Waugh have to do to take another step forward after a strong rookie season in Laval and making the NHL team?
I think the biggest thing for Joshua Waugh is just continue to amp up the pace he plays at. Get a little faster in his skating, because the mindset that guy has, and I've wrote about this a few times, I wrote about it in the Prospect Pool review, that this is a kid that is the ultimate complementary player. We talked about Chris Kunitz earlier. You mentioned him. That's kind of the role Joshua Waugh plays. He's never going to be the line driver, but he's going to make everyone around him better because of the little things he does. If you need him to be the playmaker, he's going to be able to kind of get into space and send that pass across ice. If you need him to be the finisher, he's going to get to those spots, and he's got a good shot. He's not ever going to be this top line guy necessarily, but he's that middle six offensive complementary guy that you go on a long playoff run and you're like, oh, wow, Joshua Waugh had 17 points in 19 games. Where like that's how you go on that long run. A guy like Waugh is able to kind of fill in those spots. And do I think Joshua Waugh is ever going to be this guy that dominates or even looks dominant when he does put up those big numbers in short periods of time? No, but I think he's going to be a guy that really just plays off of whoever he's with. He's another guy that I look at and I'm like, man, you put him opposite of Ivan Demidov, he's got a nice, easy day at the beach to kind of just do his thing and pick up some points.
So our lovely friend Sebastian High. So this is a long question, so I'm going to shorten it a little bit. He says, please talk my ears off about the 2024 eligibles you wish you were asked about more often. So let me just ask you, which 2024 eligibles do you wish you were asked about more often? And maybe our fellow hosts across the network can take note and ask you about them.
All right, I will go. I saw this question beforehand, so I pulled up a few players from the second to fourth round that I thought I loved. I thought they deserved more love throughout the year. The first one's Ollie Josephson, a transitional monster. Didn't score a ton because his team was not great. And he's a guy that I think has all the tools to be a much better offensive producer. Seattle drafted him. Love that pick for him. I think he's a great player that should have gotten more love throughout the draft process. The next player, I have to give a shout out to Sam McGilligan, who absolutely loved this kid, yelled into my ear every day about him until I liked him. And he did a good job because he's a pretty good player. And that's Luke Osborne, a player that was drafted by the Buffalo Sabres in the mid-rounds. Really smart player. I like to see all of the tools he has. This is a guy that I look at and I go, man, he is almost awesome because he'll do two or three things that are fantastic. And you're like, oh, and then he doesn't do the third thing. And you're like, okay, finish that. Let me see you finish that play next time.
Yeah.
And then in the defensive end, you'll see him kind of just a player's coming in attacking him, and he just kind of walks up and takes the puck sometimes. Doesn't do it all the time, and that frustrates you. But every once in a while, he'll just take the puck, and you're like, there have been a number of times in USHL games where the camera operator will continue with the attacking player, and Luke Osborne's gone the other way or something. So I think he's a guy that I really like. Another one that I loved was John Whipple, a very similar player in terms of knows what to do, has the process, and he was the guy that I thought with the NTDP really kind of was asked to rein his game in. They had guys like Cole Hudson, Logan Hensler, and others that were able to kind of push the pace offensively and do the things. And they asked a guy like John Whipple, who has all of the same skills to do those things, to reserve his game play defensive role. And John Whipple did that to a nth degree. He was so good at it. I think there's so much more to give in his game, and the Red Wings drafted him real late in the draft, and I think he's a solid pick. A couple more here. Noel Franzen, one of my guys from the start of the year, not even on Central Scouting's list. I take full credit for him being there at the end of the season because this kid was so good this year. He played for Farjestad, played for the men's team, scored a goal there. Defenseman that really knows how to push the pace, really fun player. I love the kid. I think he's a guy that should have been drafted where he was, and a lot of people were surprised he was drafted where he was. And the Carolina Hurricanes, as always, draft a pretty good player in that regard. John Mustard, absolute dynamite winger, just up and down the ice. No regard for whether his teammates or defenders are on the ice. He just goes and tries to score the goal. It's not always the best course of action, but he's a guy that I'm like, if he starts to use his teammates even just a little bit more, there's a lot more to give, and that's a Blackhawks pick there. Adam Cleaver, shut down offensive defenseman, big boy who likes to throw some hits and just makes a good save first pass. Every time, he's not necessarily the guy I always love, the kind of player I love, but every time I watched him, I went, man, throw him on my team on the second or third pair, and I'll make do with him. I'll put an offensive dynamo with him. And speaking of offensive dynamos, the final player I will say is Alphonse Frey. I love this kid. In my opinion, a top 3 defender in this entire draft class. Didn't get drafted until the second round.
With the pick
second
the
round,
Jets
37th
got
overall.
from the Habs in what ended up
Yes.
being the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. No, I'm not mad because it went to Arizona for Dvorak and then to a whole bunch of things, and it ended up going to Winnipeg in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. And given who they picked, I'm only a little bit upset. So
Scott's not mad.
It's fine. You guys
don't
did
put
good
in the
first
papers that I
round.
got mad, please.
You guys had a good first round. Let Winnipeg have one in the second round.
No, absolutely not.
Some of the rest of their draft. And yeah, those are the guys. Those are just a few names I pulled up for you.
Just a few names. I love whenever we have you on the show, you're always so ready. Like we love that. We already answered this question, but I'm going to read it because Andrew G is one of our most closest friends of the show. I would say at this point, outside of the big names, which Habs prospects should fans be the most excited about? So we did talk about that. And then we've got 2 questions from our good friend JD Young of Locked On Sharks. The first one the first one you already answered. Is Tony worried about the potential sea depth of the Habs prospect pool? Clearly not, since we spent 45 minutes talking about it. So that's good. Okay, so then what is the best thing Tony ate in Vegas?
I wish I ate more in Vegas. I didn't eat that much, honestly. Like I was constantly doing something, constantly walking around. Very hot city. But the best thing I ate in Vegas was probably this little bagel shop. I got lost in the morning one day. I woke up at 6 a.m. or something like that on the day of the first round, and I had no clue where to go for breakfast. So I just kind of wandered around, didn't want to go to a buffet. I found this bagel spot, couldn't tell you what it was called, couldn't tell you where it was, but it was just a New York style bagel with 2 medium over medium eggs and bacon and cream cheese, and it was absolutely fantastic. They like squished it down, and I'm like, oh, that looks like garbage. And then I ate it, and it was chef's kiss. I'm a big breakfast guy, so anytime I can have a good bagel, that's what I'm doing.
And then finally, a question from Ed. It's confession time. What's the best type of poutine? What's your no-brainer choice?
I think the best type of poutine is a classic poutine. I think you can't go wrong with a classic poutine. I absolutely love a classic poutine. But we have a couple poutineries here in Windsor, and there's this one place, shout out Frenchie's, who is a little sketchy, but they make this bacon carbonara poutine or something along those lines. And it's the most ridiculous combination of just like pasta sauce, like carbonara sauce with bacon on a poutine with the gravy, and it's so good. So good. So if you're ever in Windsor, maybe don't go inside Frenchie's, but order it on Uber Eats because that's probably safer.
I'm going to jump in on this question too. When I lived in Rochester and now RIP Tap and Mallet, they had a poutine menu on there. And every time I would go, I'd go once a week with my friend when she got out of work. They made a breakfast poutine. So you had all the fries, and on there they had a sunny side up egg and sausage gravy with the chunks in it, melted over the top of that with the cheese curds and regular gravy kind of layered in there. And when I tell you that thing could raise the dead or cure any hangover you've ever had, I'm not kidding. It was incredible. I've yet to find anywhere else that makes a poutine like that is just as good. Someone is probably screaming at me that it's not a poutine. I don't care because it was something I loved. So I missed that.
Did it have
dearly.
gravy and cheese curds?
It did, just a different gravy. So
there you go. It was a poutine. Obviously, I'm a Montrealer. I like a classic poutine. The best poutine actually is from Quebec City, not from Montreal. But Scott, I know that when you came here, we missed the chance to take Tony to Ma Poule Mouillée, where they have the chicken. The chorizo, the piri-piri chicken and the chorizo. So, Tony, you definitely need to come to Montreal so that we can treat you to a poutine. And before we stop recording, let everybody know where they can find one, the long article you did on the Habs prospect pool, and two, where they can generally find your work.
You can generally find all my stuff on Twitter, X, whatever it's called nowadays, at the Tony Ferrari. I post everything there. And as for the Habs article, it just go to thehockeynews.com. That's where it's at. All of my prospect pool overviews for every team is there. But the Habs one, like I said, is among the longest I've done. So it's a good deep dive into the pool. It's a fun look at everyone that they drafted this year, everyone they drafted over the last couple of years, and even some of the players on the roster now. So check that out. I love everyone in Montreal. You guys are always pretty kind to me, even if I am a self-deprecating Leafs fan. And before we go, I need to say one thing. I like Ben Danford. He's fine. He's a good third-pairing defensive guy. If you get poor man's Jake Muzzin, great. Why are you drafting him in the first round? You make me come off like I hate Ben Danford. I actually really liked him this year. But Leafs fans think I hate him now because of what they did. So screw you, Toronto.
Death, Texas, and the Leafs and Sens reaching in the first round. Always. Yeah. Tony, thank you so much for being with us. And this is your last show with Scott, but hopefully you come back when Ian is my co-host, because Ian loves you too, and he's very excited to talk prospects with you.
Scott, I love you. I will miss you. And yeah, I'll come back for Ian, I guess.
It'll be fun. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning into that episode. We are so grateful to Tony. Check out his work on the Hockey News. He is fantastic. He did a deep dive into the Montreal Canadiens prospect pool. As for us, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Like I said, free and available every single day as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, Locked On Senators has an interview with Brady Tkachuk himself, so check that out. In the meantime, you'll find us on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can also email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. Please send us your mailbag questions. You know we're always looking for them. And you can also send us questions in the YouTube comments. Please do so. Please subscribe, tell your friends, etc., etc. Scott will be back with a special episode tomorrow.